Today we will discuss about top 1000 interview question. In that we will discuss about Spring Boot, Java with Spring Boot, microservices, a Spring framework, all interview questions. So whatever the interviewer will ask related for Spring Boot, microservices. So right now we are discussing all the interview questions because I collected for all interviewers whatever they are asking, that interview related for all MNCs or startup or any of the company, product based, service based company. So these all are the common interview questions which will be asked in the Spring. So right now I'm collecting for this interview of Spring questions. So this is the Spring questions where we have multiples things are there. So which is starting from this question. First is what is a Spring framework? So many of the interviewers will ask what is a Spring framework, why we are using a Spring framework, instead of a Spring framework we have any other framework, why we are not using that another framework and all. So this is the first question which will be asked as a common interview questions, which will be asked in all the interview questions. And the second is what is the benefit of a Spring framework in software development? When to use a Spring framework? When we know when to use other framework and all like this. The next question is what are the modules in core contain of a Spring framework? What are the modules in core container of a Spring framework? So there are multiple modules are there. Uh, we have a Spring MVC, Spring DAO, Spring Data, JPAs and others. So what all are the modules in data access and integrations layer of a Spring framework? So while we need to connect with the database, what all are the modules for this Spring? So we have a Spring data JPA and all, so that we can consider. So this is the common interview questions which will be asked on the related for. And the next question is what are the modules related for web layer of a Spring framework? So web layer of a Spring framework applications, what all are the modules you worked? Then they can ask, maybe some of the interviewers will ask like what is the main use of core container module in a Spring framework? Where to use, what is the main concept of that? And the next question is what kind of testing can be done in a Spring test module? What kind of testing can be done in a Spring test module? So while we are using for a Spring test to test this application, so what type of testings will be there? And the next question is what is the use of bean factory in a Spring framework? So when to use a bean factory in a Spring framework? And the next question is which is the most popular implementation of bean factory in a Spring framework? And the next question is what is XML bean factory in a Spring framework? So these all are for a Spring framework related interview questions. Now we will discuss about AOP. So what is the use of AOP module in a Spring framework? When to use AOP? What all are the component is there in AOP? And the next question is what all are the benefit of JDBC abstraction layer module in a Spring framework? What does the next question is how does a Spring support object relation mapping, that is called ORM integration? How a Spring support ORM integrations? And the next question is how does web modules work in a Spring framework? Web module. And the next question is what are the main use of a Spring MVC module? And the next question is what is the purpose of a Spring configuration file? When to use a Spring configuration file and all? And the next question is what is the purpose of a Spring IOC container? It's a very important question. Every interviewer will ask this question. What is the use of IOC? What all are the benefit of inversion of control principles? Can you explain IOC? And the next question is the main benefit of IOC principle. And the next question is does IOC contain support eager integrations or lazy loading of beans? So this IOC related is a very important questions. And the next we are discussing related for application context in a Spring is also very important question. So what all are the benefit of a Spring application context in a Spring? So this is also very important questions. Now we will discuss the next questions. How will you implement application context in a Spring framework? So there are multiple ways to use this implementation of a Spring context in a Spring framework. You can check. So this has been asked of the many of the interviewer. And explain the difference between application context and bean in a Spring, bean factory in a Spring. And the next question is difference between application context and bean factory. Which one is the preferable to use in a Spring? Either if you are using a Spring or a Spring framework concept, so either we can use a application context or bean factory. Which one will be the good, that you can check. So this is very common interview questions which will be asked by all the interviewers of different organizations, companies, and as a freshers and experience both will be considered. So this interview questions related for freshers and experience also. So what all are the main component of or typical Spring based applications? And the next question which I am discussing is a very important question. Every interviewers will ask this one. Explain dependency injection concept in a Spring framework. What is the role of dependency injection, DI? And the next question is, a Spring framework provide what kind of dependency injection mechanism? In a Spring framework, which dependency injection is better? Constructor based dependency injection or setter based dependency injection? What all are the advantage of dependency injection? What is the disadvantage of dependency injection? What is a Spring bean? And the next question is, what is the definition of a Spring bean contain? The next question is, what is a different way to provide a configuration metadata to a Spring container? So we have multiple ways to provide a configuration metadata in a Spring container. And the next question is, what is the difference scope of bean supported by a Spring? So it's a very important question which will be asked by all the interviewers. So this is a Spring bean, a scope of a Spring bean. And the next question is, how will you define the scope of bean in a Spring? And is it safe to assume this singleton bean is a thread shape in a Spring framework? And the next question is, what all are the design pattern used in a Spring framework? We are using multiple design patterns. We have factory, DAO, singleton, MVCs and all. So we are using multiple design patterns, Saga and all. So depends on the requirement, on project basis we are using multiple design pattern. So they can ask the related for some design patterns used in a Spring framework. And what is a life cycle of bean in a Spring framework? What are the two main group of method in bean life cycle? We have a multiples groups are there. So two main groups of bean life cycle. And the next question is, can we override main lifecycle method in bean in a Spring? And the next question is, what is inner bean in a Spring? How can we inject Java collection in a Spring framework? It's a very important question. What is the bean writing in a Spring? What is auto wiring in a Spring? What are the different module of auto wiring supported in a Spring? What all are the case in which auto wiring may not work in a Spring framework? Is it allowed to inject null or empty Spring value in a Spring? What is Java based configuration in a Spring? The next question is, what is the purpose of configuration annotation? It's a very important question. What is the use of @configuration annotation? And the next question is, what is the difference between @configuration annotation and @bean mode? In a Spring framework, what is the annotation based container configuration? And the next question is, how will you switch on annotation based writing in a Spring? Very important question. What is auto wire annotation? What is the use of auto wire annotation? The next question is, what is the use of @required annotation? Next question is, what all are the two ways to enable required annotation being post processor in a Spring? What is @qualifier annotation? Is a very important question. And how a Spring framework make JDBC coding easier for developer? What is the purpose of JDBC template? What all are the benefit of using a Spring DAO? What is the difference between Hibernate in different way to use in Hibernate in Spring? What type of object relation mapping that is called ORM supported by Spring? How will you integrate a Spring and Hibernate using Hibernate DAO support? So DAO support. The next question is what is a different type of transaction management support by a Spring framework? Very very important question. These two is a very very important question. And the next question is what all are the benefit provided by the Spring framework for the transaction management? And the next question is give a choice between declarative and programmatic transaction management. Which method you choose and which one is a good for your project and why you choose the particular things and all. Now we have some questions related for AOP, that is called aspect oriented programming. What is AOP? What is an AOP in Spring? In in Spring AOP, what is the difference between concern and cross cutting concern? What is joint point in AOP Spring? What is advice in Spring? What is the difference between different type of advice in AOP? What is point cut in AOP? What is the introductions in Spring AOP? What is a target object in Spring AOP? What is a proxy in Spring AOP? What is the difference between auto proxy creation in Spring? What is weaving in Spring AOP? In Spring AOP, weaving is done at compile time or runtime. What is XML schema based aspect implementations? What is annotation based aspect implementations in Spring? How does a Spring framework work? What is dispatcher servlet? Can we have a more than one dispatcher servlet in a Spring MVC? So right now, whatever after AOP we are covering this some of the questions they can ask maybe related for a Spring MVC framework. So it's also part of a Spring framework. So where we have a some dispatcher servlet and also this all are the very very important questions. What is dispatcher servlet? Can we have more than one dispatcher servlet? What is web context in application web context in a Spring MVC? What is a controller in a Spring MVC framework? What is at the rate request mapping application annotation in a Spring web? So this is a very very important question, at the rate request mapping annotation in a Spring. Now we will consider the next question is what is the main features of a Spring MVC? What is the difference between singleton and prototype bin in a Spring? So mostly we use singleton prototype bins in a Spring. So what is the use of that and difference? And the next question is how will you decide which scope prototype or singleton to use for a bin in a Spring? What is the difference between setter and constructor based dependency indexing in a Spring framework? What all are the drawback of setter based dependency injections in Spring? What is the difference between dependency injection and factory pattern? So the next question is in a Spring framework, what is the difference between file system resource and class path resource? The next question is name of popular Spring framework annotations that you used in your project. There are some popular annotations is there in a Spring Boot, so which we are using on daily basis. So what type of there and how you use what is that? The next question is how can we upload a file in a Spring MVC application? Very very important question. Either in a Spring MVCs or Spring Boot applications, so they can ask this. So what is the different type of event provide is a Spring framework? What is the difference between dispatcher servlet and context leader loader listener in Spring? How you will handle the exception in a Spring MVC or a Spring framework? So this is very very important questions. And then what is the best practice of a Spring framework? What is a Spring Boot? Why a Spring Boot is required? And when to use a Spring Boot, when to use a Spring, when to use a Spring MVCs. So these type of things they will ask mostly, and apart from this we have a multiple others interview questions which we will discuss on next video. But right now we will discuss some of the microservices related questions also here, because this is related for Spring microservice, Spring framework and Spring MVCs, which will be covered today, and the next video we will cover others tools or JSP servlet, Maven, Git and others. So Hibernate, JPA, AWS and all, Unix. So there are multiple interview questions which I have collected, because many of the interviewers will ask in the different ways, depends on the requirement. Some of the interviewer may ask JSP, some of the interviewer may ask a Spring Boot, some of the interviewer may ask a Spring Framework, some of the interviewer will ask JS, Java 8, some of the interviewer will ask some Unix or database questions, some of the interviewers will ask or maybe some different core Java concepts and all, or collection framework, exception things and all. So what all are the possibility for this experience or as well as freshers which they are preparing for the interview? So these all are the collected interview questions which is applicable for all, either freshers, experience, product based, service based, or any organizations, any product companies related for Java things. So right now we will discuss about this microservices. So this microservices also have some basic questions which will be asked by the interviewer. What is microservice? What is the benefit architectures of microservice? What is the role of microservice architectures? Why we are using microservice? What is the monolithic was there? What is the difference between monolithic and microservices? What all are the advantages of microservice architectures over service oriented? So we have a SOA, we have a monolithic, we have a microservice. So which one is the better and why we are using? uh, and the next question is it good idea to provide a tailored service template for the microservice deployment in organizations? So it's a very important questions which will be asked. And the next question is what is a disadvantage using shared library approach to decompose a monolithic application? What all are the characteristics of good microservice? And the next question is what is bounded context, and what is the point to remember during the integration of microservice? Is it good for the microservice share a common database? It's a very important question. And what is preferred type of communications between microservice as a asynchronous and synchronous? And what is the difference between orchestration and choreography in the microservice architecture? What is the issue in REST and our HTTP microservices? Can we create a microservice as a state machine? So these all are the interview questions, common interview questions which will be asked by the interview, because microservice is a concept, or Spring Boot also is a concept which will be taken care based on the Spring framework. So it's a technique where we can create a project based on microservice based, monolithic based, or SOA based. So these things we have covered related for microservice, Spring Boot, Spring framework, or Spring MVCs related interview questions. The next video we will cover others. Let me know if any other type of interview questions you want. We will try for this my best. Yeah, thank you. Please like, subscribe my channel and support my channel. Thank you.